Today, there is interesting news from the Siversk direction. Here, in a desperate bid to break through Ukraine's well-protected defense line in front of Siversk, Russian forces launched a massive assault using 50 motorcycles and light vehicles. Ukrainian defenders managed to adapt quickly and deal significant damage to this enemy attempt. The Russian goal here is to penetrate the heavily fortified Vyanka-Zvinivka defensive belt, which serves as a critical shield for Siversk, preventing Russian forces from making any meaningful advances in the region. Having exhausted almost every other attack vector in the Siversk direction with little success, Russian commanders saw this last untouched sector as their only remaining option for a major push, even if it is very well protected. The Vyanka-Zvinivka line is the gateway to Siversk, and breaching it would allow Russian forces to pressure Ukrainian defenders, paving the way for deeper advances. However, previous mechanized assaults in the Siversk direction were disastrous, costing Russians an entire army of tanks and vehicles. The sheer scale of Russian losses forced the removal of Colonel General Gennady Anashkin after reports surfaced that his officers had submitted false battlefield reports to the Russian High Command, where they exaggerated their progress. With new leadership, Russian commanders are trying a completely different approach, shifting away from traditional armor-heavy offensives to fast-moving light vehicle attacks. To avoid repeating past failures, Russian forces abandoned large, armored columns and relied on motorcycles and ATVs for maneuverability. Their strategy revolved around speed, unpredictability, and overwhelming Ukrainian defenses before they could react. By launching rapid successive assaults, Russian troops hoped to bypass Ukraine's artillery kill zones and force a breakthrough. The motorcycle's ability to navigate rough terrain and evade FPV drone strikes also played into their tactical planning. Russia's logistics in the sector remain relatively efficient, enabling a steady flow of reinforcements and allowing them to sustain high-tempo assaults, giving Ukrainians very little time to detect them. However, the almost total absence of armored protection proved to be a crucial weakness. Once the attack was detected, Ukrainian forces swiftly exploited these vulnerabilities. The lightly armored vehicles offered no defense, leaving Russian troops completely exposed to drone strikes, artillery fire, and machine guns. Despite their speed and maneuverability, the Russian assault was swiftly intercepted. Ukrainian defenders from the 10th Mountain Assault Brigade, Edelweiss, maintained constant drone surveillance despite the previous low intensity of combat engagements, enabling an almost immediate response. The hilly terrain with tree lines provided some advantage to the Russians, allowing Ukrainian forces to efficiently target them as they crested the hill. Geo-located footage from the Ukrainian drone operators showcases how early the Russian group was detected, just as they were gathering to start their assault. There were also several armored vehicles present not only to provide fire support and carry additional infantry on board, but also to divert Ukrainian fire away from the main group with motorcycles. These BMP-2 became the first target of Ukrainian FPV drones and were finished off immediately, allowing the Ukrainians to focus on the motorcycles much earlier than expected. Interestingly, Ukrainian forces also effectively jammed Russian drones with electronic warfare, bringing down almost 20 Russian strike and reconnaissance FPVs, successfully preventing them from providing fire support or reconnaissance data. The next step was to target the Russian motorcycles, as they used over 40 of them in this assault alone. Unfortunately for Russians, their numbers alone offered them little advantage. Some were obliterated mid-charge, hurling riders through the air, while others were systematically picked off individually. As panic set in, the dispersed Russian troops desperately sought cover in the nearby tree lines, only to be hunted down by Ukrainian kamikaze drones. Ukrainian soldiers also took a single Russian prisoner, the sole survivor of the assault, as all others were killed or wounded. Overall, this motorcycle assault marks yet another humiliating failure in Russia's ongoing struggle to gain ground in Siversk. The noon fast and light approach has proven to be just as ineffective as the previous mechanized assaults, underscoring Ukraine's superior battlefield awareness and rapid response capabilities. Despite Russia's continuous efforts, the Vyanka-Zvinivka defense line remains intact, keeping Siversk secure and further draining Russian manpower and resources in the process. The failed Russian assault on the Vyimka-Zvenivka defensive line is more than just another defeat. It's a striking example of desperation and poor strategic planning in a protracted war where innovation often comes at the cost of practicality. Today's events reinforce the stark contrast between Russian ambition and their tactical shortcomings. For months, the Vyimka-Zvenivka defensive belt has served as an impenetrable barrier, shielding Siversk from Russian advances. Unable to crack the line through conventional means, Russian commanders turned to an unconventional method that could charitably be called audacious and more realistically, reckless, deploying swarms of motorcycles and ATVs to spearhead their assault. The idea, on paper, was simple: replace lumbering tank columns with nimble, fast-moving vehicles that could weave through difficult terrain, dodge artillery kill zones, and hit Ukrainian defenses where they were weakest. This lightning-fast strategy aimed to outmaneuver Ukrainian forces, disrupt their artillery response, and overwhelm defensive positions with speed and unpredictability. However, the plan's inherent flaws became evident almost immediately. The use of motorcycles and light vehicles for a frontal assault in such a contested region exposed critical weaknesses in Russian military thinking. While the motorcycles allowed for better terrain navigation and increased mobility, they sacrificed armored protection, leaving riders completely vulnerable to Ukrainian countermeasures. From the moment the assault began, Ukrainian forces demonstrated their superior situational awareness. The 10th Mountain Assault Brigade, Edelweiss, maintained constant surveillance using drones, which allowed them to detect Russian movements even before the attack had fully materialized. By the time the Russian troops mobilized, Ukrainian forces had already targeted their few armored support vehicles, leaving the motorcycles to face a barrage of artillery, machine gun fire, and kamikaze drones. Electronic warfare also played a critical role. Ukrainian forces effectively jammed Russian reconnaissance drones, depriving them of the ability to coordinate their assault or relay critical battlefield information. This electronic disruption rendered the Russian troops blind and exposed, nullifying any tactical advantages their speed and mobility might have provided. The scale of the failure was staggering. Of the 50 motorcycles and light vehicles that participated in the assault, none managed to penetrate the Ukrainian defensive line. Geolocated footage showed dozens of vehicles destroyed mid-charge, with riders thrown violently to the ground or left to scramble for cover in the surrounding tree lines. Ukrainian forces systematically eliminated stragglers, using drones to hunt down survivors hiding among the trees. The human cost for the Russians was equally devastating. According to reports, nearly all participants in the assault were either killed or incapacitated, with only one soldier taken prisoner. The lone survivor provided valuable intelligence about the operation's objectives and the growing desperation among Russian ranks. This failed assault underscores a larger trend in the Siversk sector: Russia's inability to adapt effectively to Ukraine's dynamic defenses. Each successive attack, whether armored or light, has been met with overwhelming resistance, resulting in significant Russian losses. The Vyimka-Zvenivka defensive belt remains intact, securing Siversk and forcing Russian forces to pour even more resources into a seemingly unwinnable battle. The failed motorcycle assault also highlights the growing strain on Russian manpower and equipment. With tanks and other heavy vehicles in short supply after months of catastrophic losses, the Russian military's reliance on motorcycles and light vehicles signals a worrying depletion of resources. This shift to less conventional tactics may indicate that Russian commanders are running out of viable options to achieve their objectives in the Siversk direction. For Ukrainian forces, this battle reaffirms the effectiveness of their layered defenses and rapid response capabilities. By maintaining constant surveillance and leveraging electronic warfare, they were able to neutralize a potentially disruptive assault before it could pose a serious threat. For the Russians, however, the lesson is far grimmer. The transition from heavy to light vehicles has done little to improve their prospects on the battlefield. Without proper coordination, reconnaissance, or protection, such tactics are doomed to fail against Ukraine's highly adaptive defenses. The failure of this assault puts Russian forces in an even more precarious position in the Siversk sector. The inability to breach the Vyanka-Zvanivka line means that Russian commanders must now regroup and reconsider their strategy. However, with limited resources and mounting losses, their options are dwindling. As for Ukraine, this victory serves as yet another morale boost and a testament to their superior battlefield tactics. With Siversk secure, Ukrainian forces can continue to reinforce their positions and prepare for future offensives aimed at reclaiming lost territory. In the broader context of the war, the failed motorcycle assault near Siversk is a microcosm of Russia's struggles. Despite their numerical advantage, Russian forces have been unable to translate their resources into meaningful progress on the battlefield. This latest failure not only weakens their position in the region but also exposes deeper flaws in their military doctrine and operational planning. As the war drags on, the question remains: how much longer can Russia sustain such costly and ineffective operations? For now, the Vyanka-Zvanivka line stands as a symbol of Ukrainian resilience and a stark reminder of the challenges facing an overstretched and underprepared Russian military.